Is Mass enough? Enough for what? Enough to be a good Catholic, enough to be a disciple, enough to be saved. Because sometimes the Christian Catholic life can be a bit burdensome. There's a lot asked of us. There's a lot of our mind and what we think about and how we devote our schedule and how we use our resources and what Bible studies I should go to or what virtue I should work on and how often should I go to confession and all these things. And it can seem sometimes quite burdensome, all this stuff. So couldn't we just simplify it by saying at the end of the day, just come to Mass. Don't worry about anything else. Just get to Mass. Well, let me ask you this. If you wanted to run a marathon, 26.2 miles, would it be enough? Would it be sufficient to run only once per week, 1 hour per week, if you wanted to run a marathon? Well, maybe. There's people probably that could do that, but probably not the norm. If you really wanted to run a marathon and to run it well and to have a founded hope that you would actually finish and even run so as to win, it would entail far more than just 1 hour per week. It's going to entail a change probably in your eating habits, maybe your sleeping habits. My goodness, probably even some of your mental faculties and what you think about. Second example, if you wanted to get married someday, or maybe you are married, would it be enough to speak with your spouse only 1 hour per week out of 168 hours? Maybe. I suppose that could be possible. It would certainly be necessary to at least speak 1 hour, but would it be sufficient? Because if you want to get married, it's going to entail, love always entails a lot of things. It's going to entail probably some behavioral changes. It's going to entail things on your calendar. It's going to affect certain sacrifices in your life. So we could say that with both running a marathon or being married, a substantially bigger task, that speaking or running only 1 hour per week out of 168 hours would certainly be necessary, absolutely. But perhaps for the vast majority of people, it would not be sufficient. Now, in the life of loving God, God is the ultimate lover of mankind. And in his great love, God gives us the great commandment. And that great commandment is, you shall love the Lord your God with at least 1 hour of your week out of the 160, that's not the greatest commandment. The greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all of your soul, all of your mind, all of your body, all of your strength. Because at the end of the day, we cannot even compare the life of loving God with even running a marathon or even a marriage. As good as that image can be for the Christian life, neither of those are completely adequate. Why? Because the life of loving God is the meaning of life itself. And we cannot or should not reduce the meaning of life itself to just 1 hour out of 168 hours. I am not in the least discounting that the Mass is the greatest activity or event that we could ever participate in. But we cannot live the meaning of life, the life of loving God, merely with kind of a minimalistic attitude of, it's okay if I just get 1 hour in at the end of the day. Because the life of loving God necessitates loving him with everything. That's the greatest commandment. That's the only real way to want to live the Christian life. A question for us could be, how did the early church live this greatest commandment? In the Acts of the Apostles, Acts 2:42 in Scripture, we read that the early church devoted themselves to 4 things, not just going to Mass. Is Mass enough? No, they devoted themselves to 4 things. So they devoted themselves, Acts 2:42 says, they devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles, to the community life, to the breaking of the bread, and to the prayers. Now, each of those 4 things mean something quite significant. They devoted themselves to the teaching of the apostles. That's the life of the truth handed down by the apostles from Jesus himself. That's the life really of mentally and even physiologically aligning our lives with the life of truth. Jesus is the truth. Then they devoted themselves to the communal life, the common life, living with friends and neighbors, and how do I exist in the church? That's really the life of learning virtue. So it will necessitate, is Mass enough? No, we have to acquire and learn behavioral virtues. And that really happens most especially in the life of the common life, in the life of the church. And so then they devote themselves to the breaking of the bread. And that has always been a code for the Mass. It wasn't the only thing. It was one of the four things, though. And then finally, they devoted themselves to the prayers. Prayer, as Padre Pio said, is the oxygen of the soul. We cannot live without breath, and we cannot live the Christian life without prayer. And that has to go beyond just, kind of a flash in the pan, like, oh, I'll just go to Mass. It really has to affect us, because the meaning of life and loving God must affect more than just kind of a quadrant, a very small quadrant of my life. At the end of the day, a lot of us have virtual PhDs in evasion of what is difficult. I have several of these. And so to that end, be encouraged. It's not easy to devote ourselves in a wholehearted way to the life of following Christ. We evade oftentimes difficult things. We're very good at it. But to that end, hear Jesus' words when he says to you and I and to the whole church, take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid to what? To love, and to love God with all. God bless you.